Walking a path along the roots of Pikes Peak, you take a fork in the road to the Anselm Society Digital Pub. Inside is a raucous conversation on the arts, faith, and whether any of the member artists have any background in yodeling. At a corner table by the fire are three people. One of them is looking at one of his guests with a quizzical expression, one of interest, one wondering if perhaps there might be some yodeling talent hidden beneath the surface. And that person is me, Matthew Mellema, and welcome to Believe to See, a podcast of the Anselm Society Arts Guild. Here at Believe to See, we explore the relationship between faith, art, and storytelling. Our goal is to help you connect the great story, the great stories, and our own stories in order to understand what it means to live with a Christian imagination. So I want to start this podcast by focusing on one particular moment. It's an absolutely wonderful moment for anybody who's ever tried to create something, especially, a story. I'm talking about the moment of inspiration, when that idea hits your imagination like a bolt of lightning. It feels kind of like magic. But after that moment is when all the problems start. When you start planning out your idea, you realize that this has a lot of steps, and some of them might be kind of hard. And then you actually start the project. Suddenly everything seems so big and complex and impossible. How can anybody do this, let alone you? Maybe you should just give up and go back to binging Outer Banks. Well, if you've ever thought that, don't worry. We're here to fix everything. Or at least help. Or at least commiserate with you. But seriously, how do you approach creating a story when it seems too big for you? Well, we're about to get to that, but first let's bring in our co-host here, Mandy Hauk. Mandy, how are you doing?
I'm great, and I am not a yodeler, just in case that...
You're not?
I'm not, so it's not me.
Okay, well, we're going to have to go to our guest then.
I'm very excited.
She is a member artist of the Anselm Society Arts Guild, and actually the assistant director of the Arts Guild, and has a lot of talents that we didn't know anything about. Gianna Soderstrom. Gianna, how are you?
I'm great, thank you.
Okay, so let me tell the listeners a little story, give them some background. Last night we had our big welcome back to the Guild meeting. Guild's been sort of dormant for a while. We've been revamping some stuff, and now we're back, and it was super fun. And during that, for whatever reason, Christina told a joke about yodeling to Gianna, and Gianna reacted not how we would expect, and we come to find out it's because she actually has a yodeling background. So, yeah, Gianna, tell us about this.
Yes, I know.
Okay, for starters, this was at least 15 years ago. I'm trying to remember where I first heard someone yodel. I think it was at some sort of rural farming style event, and there was a yodeling cowgirl there. And I kind of was smitten with the whole sound of yodeling. So I immediately told my mom I had to learn how to yodel. And she bought this girl's CD for me and then got her email address and asked if she could email some tracks of just the music so that I could practice singing along. And this went on. I found 3 different yodelers whom I could source music from. I know that's not how you're supposed to do it. I never yodeled publicly, and I never will.
Well, luckily we're not in public. It's just me, you, and Mandy here.
Yeah, go for it.
Absolutely not. The yodeling phase ended with 4 years in a choir singing that breakout of my voice, and so I can't yodel anymore. Sorry.
Oh. Well, that's interesting. So singing is so different from yodeling. They don't typically...
Yeah, yodeling focuses on honing that break in your voice because you're jumping back and forth above and below it.
Right. But
singing really, and especially choral music,
yes,
smooths that out so that you can have your whole range without a break. And I spent 4 years doing choral music. So
you really have
goodbye
to choose.
Yodeling.
So kids, if you're considering a singing career versus a yodeling career, put a lot of thought into that.
Yeah, you really got to commit
one or the other.
And I'm just going to say, I don't know, seems like there's less competition in the yodeling sphere. So if you want to do the Moneyball selection there.
There might be less of an audience too. There is that.
The Moneyball selection.
So that was probably not the best example to do this with, because it seems like yodeling was a project that you decided was too big for you. So you went along to the smaller project of singing.
Yes,
okay.
exactly.
Sure.
So let's get to our topic today.
That was a tortured segue, but
I thought that was pretty nice.
Okay.
So our topic today is how you as a storyteller should approach a project when it seems too big for you. So I want to sort of toss the setup to Mandy and Gianna, because this sort of generated out of a conversation you both were having.
Yes.
So, and once you started having the conversation, Mandy, you were like, oh, this needs to be a podcast. So take us back, set the scene for us.
Well, honestly, most of the conversations I have nowadays, I say that should be a podcast. So, but I think, were we at the conference when we were talking about it, Gianna?
We were at the George McDonald pub night last July.
Oh, okay. Wow. Okay. Gianna's a lot younger than me, so her brain works a lot better.
That was a fun pub night, by the way.
But I just remember us commiserating. I don't remember a lot of details, but I remember we were commiserating about that feeling of you're excited to have a really big idea, but then you sort of have this drowning sensation. And I don't know, I'll tend to think, I start casting about in my imagination, thinking of all the wonderful Anselm Guild people that should probably do it instead of me, and I should pass it off. What do you remember about that conversation, Gianna?
Oh gosh, very similar. I remember just the sheer feeling of overwhelm that we commiserated over when you have an idea. And I think I maybe had some specific project in mind. I remember that I had a very detailed vision of how it should turn out. Mm-hmm. And I didn't think that I had either the skill as a writer to pull it off, or perhaps even the spiritual depth and maturity to pull it off. I was like, I know where this project needs to go, and I don't know if I can get it there. I'd love to be the person who does, but I don't know if I can. And it's just such an overwhelming and almost terrifying feeling.
Mm-hmm. Like you feel like the vision that I have in my head is I'm not going to be able to pull that off. Sort of like the Pinterest fails, the nailed it.
Yes. Yes.
That's how I am. Anything I want to do visually, like craft wise, that happens to me all the time.
By the way, Nailed It on Netflix, one of me and my boys' favorite shows.
I love that show. Yeah, I would do well on that show because I would nail it.
I was actually thinking of auditioning. Maybe you should audition together.
Get a yodel prepared.
Get a yodel prepared?
Yeah.
Woo! Yeah. But anyway, but it's true though. I feel like it's almost like you fall in love with the project so much and your vision of the project is so beautiful that then you have like this shrinking feeling like,
Exactly.
but not me.
Exactly.
I can't.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very much.
So I have felt this too. So let me see if we can generalize this sensation. So,
Okay.
listeners, we can all know, are we all in this together, or am I just alone in the cosmos? So for me, there's like this initial idea. Like the idea, I think we've had podcasts about getting ideas before, and it's always great. Like I love getting an idea, right? It's always energizing. You just want to go write a whole bunch of notes about it while it's all fresh in your head. I want to just pace up and down and, flesh everything out. But then you actually get down to brass tacks. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's when you actually start to do a serious outline, or for others, when they start the first draft or do all that.
Right.
When, for you, Mandy, does the shine wear off and you're like, oh no?
Usually, because I typically write novels. So for me, it's when I realize I need to do pretty intricate research. Like I like research in general. I can waste a lot of time doing research. But it's really when I start to worry, I'm not going to get this right. Like I'm going to, for whatever era I'm writing in, I'm going to get it wrong, or whatever town, I start to panic that, some reader, here I am drafting and I'm already thinking of a reader that is like 5,000 steps down the road. But anyway, and I'll be like, oh no, a reader will be from that town and it'll be wrong. Or I'm reading, a lot of times, if I'm reading a really beautiful writer, then I get the sinking feeling because we've talked before about like you have a tendency to imitate Cormac McCarthy accidentally.
I do a really bad but very sticky Cormac McCarthy imitation whenever I read him. Yeah.
Right, and my first draft of the novel I just finished was particularly bad because I was trying to be Shirley Jackson, and I can't do Shirley Jackson because her characters are very different from the way I write my characters because I don't know. So I think, well, it sounds like it's when I'm comparing or when I'm worried about what other people think. Aha, interesting.
So let's
this is like therapy. Thank you.
So let's put a pin in both those ideas.
Okay.
So there's the dread that comes from realizing just how much, kind of like drudging work is ahead of you, right?
Well, it's not the drudging, it's that I'm going to get it wrong no matter how hard I try. It's the fear of it's fear of getting it wrong.
So fear of getting it wrong, and then fear of not living up to like some legendary writer that you're reading. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, Gianna, let's get your take here. When does the happiness wear off and when does the fear come in?
Mm-hmm.
Oh gosh, usually about the moment I open a new blank document and then I just sit there looking at it and I'm like, I have this shining ideal in my head and I have no words in my head with which to write this shining ideal.
Right.
Yeah, it all kind of, I'm not even thinking of readers or other writers to emulate. It's just like, I know where I want this to go. I can't think of anything to say.
The paralysis is real.
Yeah.
I will say, I think this is one of the reasons why I always try to go out of my way to have as detailed of an outline as possible.
Yeah.
Because I have tried to just like sit down and start writing stuff in the past, and it went so poorly that I was like, I just, like you said, sitting down with the blank page, not knowing where I'm going with it, I can't handle that. So I need like a roadmap.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I have outline envy. I wish that I could do outlines, but I think I've said this before that my issue with outlines is that once I've written the outline, it like sucks the soul out of the idea because for me, when I write, a lot of what I'm doing is reading what I'm writing. You know what I mean? I'm going on the journey, so if I already know where it's going to end, then it sucks the idea joy out. You know what I mean? Because there are no more questions. You can't
explore the idea.
What?
You can't explore the idea in the same way if you
right.
have an outline. I'm with you on that.
Right.
I will mull things over for days or weeks, but I cannot make an outline or I lose all interest.
Right. So typically what I do is, which I figured this out about, I don't know, my 300th draft of my second out of 3 novels. So I figured out that the way to really get going is to write like journal entries, which often end up becoming chapters. I'll write journal entries from the perspective of different characters.
So that's like you're dipping your toe in the water, getting started.
That's how,
Okay.
Yeah. And then like I said, a lot of times it'll end up becoming a chapter, and that's probably why I write multiple narrators. So sorry if people don't like that, don't buy my book if it ever is one, because I don't know. Yeah, that's sort of where I default is the multiple narrators.
Actually, that's a really fascinating backstory for having multiple narrators. I'm a fan. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, so keeping track here, the things that cause us to feel like the fear, the brooding omnipresence over us is getting it wrong, especially with a lot of like the details, the sort of workaday stuff we need to do. There's not living up to the expectations, to like the examples we see from others, like, oh man, this was a good sentence, but was it a Hemingway sentence?
Right.
And then there's just
Faulkner. I'm more of a Faulkner person.
I like Faulkner better than Hemingway too.
Okay.
Yeah. I know as being a dude writer, I'm supposed to like Hemingway.
Nah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's fine.
Faulkner was pretty I don't know.
Well, Faulkner and Hemingway did not care
Oh,
for
they
each other.
hated each other.
Yeah.
There's really funny things that they wrote about each other.
You
But
do,
anyway.
You do need to kind of pick sides. So
You gotta
I'm on Team Faulkner.
I'm not saying I don't like Hemingway. I enjoy his writing. But if I'm going to choose, I'm going to go Faulkner.
Me too.
Good.
Oh,
glad we settled that.
We agree on this at least.
Yes.
So then there's just the fear of the blank page, which is like the fear of actually getting started.
Mm-hmm.
So I will say I really can resonate with all of these. Let's start with the fear of like getting it wrong. And I think this has a lot to do with last podcast I recorded, which was world building.
Yes,
And-
with Elisa and Evangeline.
Yep. So one of the things we discussed was this tendency to try to keep researching, adding, so you never want to get started.
Right.
So part of that is, procrastination. And another part is I feel like I have this impossible task. I want to create a whole separate world. And I never feel done.
Right. That
So
makes
I
sense.
have probably hundreds of pages of notes for my one book that I'm writing right now on just like world building stuff. I don't feel ready. Like part of me still wants to all right, I'm going to read a few treatises on like classical architecture and like cuisine and some paleontology books and all this other stuff. And it does kind of feel impossible. I will never get the world right to the extent that I'd actually be satisfied with it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't even write fantasy, and I was going through books the other day, getting rid of not a bunch, let's be honest. I got rid of like 8 books, but out of all my books. But I was laughing at all the books that I have that are, I bought for specific things I wrote. Like I have this book on hobos. I have a book on con men because one of my characters was a con man. So I have like this book that actually teaches you how to con people. So watch out.
Whoa.
No.
All right.
I have this huge book on bird feathers. So I'm always like, oh, but I have to know everything about this.
Yep. I went through this whole thing where I have like several cities in my main world, and I wanted each city to have its own fully fleshed out religion. So I read this book on ancient religion with the intention of fleshing out every system and like relating it to, and it was like, that's probably an impossible task.
And overkill.
But in the moment, it felt very necessary, even though it was impossible.
Yeah.
And then, not living up to others, that is very, very relatable because I think we've talked about this before too, but when you read other books, I'm guessing, but all of us read a lot of books, and if you're the sort of person listening to this podcast, I'm guessing you read a lot of books too. And if you're working on a book, there's sort of these twin dangers. They're equal and opposite dangers. The first is to think, wow, this book is bad. I could write way better than this. How come they get a big publishing deal and I don't have one?
Ding, ding. Yes.
Or the equal and opposite one, which is like, wow, this is amazing. I could never do this.
Exactly.
Why do I even try?
Mm-hmm. Which is, it's more often the latter.
Yeah.
I don't go out looking for bad books to read.
Which do you find more upsetting, though?
They're upsetting in different ways. What about Gianna? Are you upset by those things?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. But they're
Yes.
upsetting in different ways, don't you think?
Yes, but I do find it more upsetting when I read a really terrible book.
I think
and I'm
so,
like,
too.
and I sometimes, especially if it's a contemporary author, I will look them up and be like, yeah, okay, it's because you have 2 million followers. You can't write.
Right. But how did they
You
get the
can
2
sell
million
yourself.
followers?
Cute pictures.
I think
Sorry.
I am more angry when I'm reading bad books. Like I
Yes.
get more angry and frustrated, which is not a good place to be creative
It's
from
not.
which to, write beautiful sentences. But the of the two, the one that will stop me is the really beautiful books.
Interesting.
That's
so,
the one.
That's a good point.
So
Yeah.
reading the bad books and thinking I'm way better than that might be more damaging to like your soul.
Yes.
But reading the great books and thinking I can never do that might be more damaging to your artistic output.
Yes, because it's really hard to write when you are snuggled up in your covers and can't get out of bed.
Yeah.
It's really hard.
Yep.
I find the lighting is terrible under a down comforter.
That happens. That happens to me a lot of times, like reading poetry, especially because it's sort of this wonderful feeling, but also it can kind of make you depressed afterward. Like I'll read some lines that like you read poems and most of them are fine. A few of them, a lot of them are forgettable, but every now and then you'll read like a poem or even a couple lines. It's just like they're like electric. Like it's like bzz in your brain. You're like, that's amazing.
I mean,
how did that happen? This is like a magic spell he did. I could never do that.
I mean, Jane, yes, she's our friend, but legitimately Jane Charles poetry, you're like, wow, how did she do that? And T.S. Eliot, I don't know. Yeah, it's like a zinger. It's almost devastating.
Truly.
Why do we torture ourselves? I know. Let's all stop reading, and then we will be able to write.
That'll help us a great deal, yes.
We figured it out.
We only read the work of people who we think are worse than us. That sounds healthy.
But only slightly. Worse than us, but unpublished. And then we won't be jealous.
Are there any particular authors that get you to do that more consistently? The awe/depression?
Oh, the depression?
You're depressed because of how in awe you are of their writing.
Well, Shirley Jackson. Emma Donoghue, she wrote The Wonder, which they made into a movie, which I haven't watched yet because I'm scared. But they cast Florence Pugh. So that was probably a good move.
Yeah,
but it is excellent. Faulkner, obviously. And I have to admit, I have not been able to do. I haven't gotten through The Sound and the Fury. You're going to have to help me with that one.
I haven't read it yet either.
Oh, okay.
I was looking for something to put on my reading list. There we go.
And John Steinbeck. John Steinbeck is
Okay.
one of my absolute favorite authors ever. And for him, really, I will read a page and then just go, wait, but how did he do that? And then I'll go back and read it again. Because to me, Steinbeck has the simplicity of language that Hemingway has, but it doesn't feel plain. I love Steinbeck. So yeah, I don't read, I started reading East of Eden last year and I had to put it aside because I'm like, I really have to finish my book and I cannot. So I should pick that one up again.
So my list.
Yes.
We already discussed how Cormac McCarthy is both good and bad for me as a writer because I do admire his style. As another writer, he's sort of in that Southern school. I'd say he's sort of like a more contemporary Faulkner, but with David Foster Wallace twist. Barry Hannah.
Oh yes, I love Barry Hannah.
I love his writing style so much.
Yes.
And again, like a depressing amount. And like poets, Scott Cairns, he's a contemporary Orthodox poet. Highly recommend him. And you all can laugh at me for this one.
Okay, I'm ready.
This might be one of those. He's like the patron poet of angsty 16-year-old boys, but cut me some slack. Dylan Thomas.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I remember just so distinctly reading Dylan Thomas. I was like, gosh, how can anyone put words together like that?
Yeah, Langston Hughes is. I love Langston Hughes.
Yes. By the pale dull pallor of an old glass lamp.
Yes.
Just a random line just stuck in my head from when I was 20. Just like, it's like, yeah, those words are all arranged perfectly. By the pale dull pallor. Okay. Anyway, Gianna.
If it's easy to memorize, that tells you the line is amazing. But what about you, Gianna?
Oh gosh, I think two of my favorite authors would be Louisa May Alcott, and which reading her old unpublished books that were like published posthumously gives me a lot of hope.
Oh, good.
They're hilarious.
Oh, really?
They're shockingly youthful and idealistic.
Oh, that's
and
great.
Dramatic and gothic, and they're really funny.
Good.
They're like laughably gothic, which like seeing the progression from that to Little Women is like, okay, so I can write a trashy first novel or memoir or whatever and shove it in my drawer and go on and write a second, hopefully less trashy.
Then after you die, they can publish the first one.
I have two.
My yodeling memoir can come out after I'm dead.
I have two novels that I need to like destroy the files just in case because.
How about if you don't though?
I don't know.
Well,
Let's hope this one is not.
Terry Pratchett, the guy who wrote the Discworld series, The Color of Magic, that thing. He had some unfinished work when he died, but he had orders in his will for the hard drive to be run over by a steamroller.
Okay.
So they never
my
saw the light
goodness.
of day.
I'm just sitting here. You can see my surprise face. I totally thought Terry Pratchett was a woman. I had no idea.
I'm pretty sure he's a man.
Oh,
I think he had a beard in the picture.
I've never seen the picture.
No, I'm losing confidence now. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. That would be, yeah, I should put that in my will. So we'll see if
All
my
right, so-
third time is the charm, or if it's 3 strikes we're out. I don't know. But who else? You said Louisa May
I have
Alcott
2 others.
and
One is Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings, who wrote The Yearling.
yes,
That is, I almost don't even know why it's my favorite book.
I love that book.
And I think it's the perfect and immaculate way she depicts this coming of age story through grief and hardship, and also with joy, and that life continues to be worth living after.
Yeah, the hope. I read that to my
yes.
children, which the last
Oh, I couldn't read it out loud.
It was not easy.
I don't think. And then, as I do have a favorite poet at the moment, it's Malcolm Guite and his The Singing Bowl. If anyone
Yep.
wants to look up a poem, I highly recommend. That's like my theme poem. I love that one very much.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so now that we've identified all the writers who make us feel less than, and that we've identified all the different ways we could get things wrong or get intimidated, let's move to the constructive advice phase here. So what do you think are the best remedies for you when you read something that you think is amazing by like this great author and you're just feeling insufficient in comparison? What are ways to move past that, move through it?
I typically will text one of you guys or Evangeline or one of my best friends who's not a writer, Lisa Brisky. I will make her listen to this. Sorry, her married name is Brisky. Anyway, or one of my children, because all y'all who are so sad that your little babies are growing up. Trust me, having kids in their 20s is pretty awesome because they know you really well, and for good and ill. But both of my daughters are really good at encouraging. I seek encouragement, and but honest encouragement. I don't want, don't pat me on my head.
I feel like that's a good one, though. Like,
yeah.
By and large, when you ask your mother or something, they tend to just kind of, I know this is not universal, but mothers will be like, oh yes, you're a great writer, I can't believe you don't have a book deal already.
Yeah.
But I feel like your children will be a little bit more straight shooting with you and like, right. Well, mom.
Yeah, notice I didn't say.
So if your kids can encourage you, I feel like then you're in a good spot.
Notice I did not say I asked Peter. I adore Peter.
Husbands, spouses,
he is way too nice. It'll
they're
work.
Too nice about
It'll be great. Yeah. And I'm like, honey, thanks, but I got to go talk to someone angsty.
Well, I do think there's a time and place for sending your writing to someone who you know is going to love it. Like, I know for a fact, my mom will love every single story that I write. I just know it.
Yeah.
So if I send it to her, I know she's going to be like, I read it and I loved it so much. I'm so proud. It's like, okay, so sometimes that's helpful.
This is true.
Yeah.
This is true.
Do you know what? I actually have to tell you, because I've said on the podcast before, my mother is not that person. But after I sent my manuscript in to my agent in January, as I promised I would on one of these podcasts, my mom was like, well, I want to read it. And I did not want to send it to her because I'm like, I do not want to, because, and she's a super nice person. She doesn't realize what she's doing. She just strong emotions make her nervous. So if you're really sad, she's going to try to make light of what you're sad about. And if you're really excited, she's going to try to calm you down. So that's the thing. It's not, she's a wonderful lady. You guys have met her. She's awesome. But that's just her default mode, is to like get you unexcited. But she got me to, I printed it out and I gave it to her, and I was so scared of finding out what she thought, and she loved it.
Whoa.
And it blew my mind. Yeah. She absolutely loved it. And first time in my life that she like unqualified, absolutely like got my hopes up. That was that. I said to Peter, I go, oh no, mom got my hopes up. And then we both cracked up laughing because we're like, That has never happened before because she wants to protect me from getting too hopeful, you know. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so my mom is not typically one I would go to if I'm in that funk. I'm going to go to someone in the Arts Guild or one of my kids because both of them love reading and one of them is a writer. So, yeah.
Yep, Yay, Mom, coming in clutch, huh?
Yeah, it was awesome.
And I think another approach, and this is something I harp on a lot because it's something I feel like I need to hear a lot, is having the growth mindset versus the set mindset, right? Because if you, especially, you know, you're getting going as a writer, hopefully all that writing, all that practice is making you better at writing, right? Mm-hmm. Which means that you should be getting better the further along you go.
Well,
so
now I'm wondering, maybe I should read one of those horrible things that I wrote, like my first novel.
That might actually make you feel better.
It might.
You could look at it as like, wow, I'm way better than I was back then.
I mean, I know I am because but to actually read it, because I'm just saying, I'm not saying I'm great now. I'm saying I was awful then. So, but if I read that, then it would be easier to see.
I do that from time to time. I'll look up something I wrote like 3 or 4 years ago. And if I don't like it anymore, I'm like, good, great, we're moving forward. But sometimes I'm like, oh man, this is good. And then I'm like, oh no, have I not grown at all? it can kind of backfire. But I feel like when I get really intimidated, kind of the best thing that I've found I have to do, shout out to my dad here, I pretty much just have to like walk it off. I have no idea how many times Dad said that to me as a kid, just walk it off. But
it's good dad advice.
It's good dad advice, and I guess it actually does help.
So do you literally walk it off?
Sometimes, yes.
Okay. Doesn't Stephen King do that?
Sometimes it's like you got to put the book down and just leave the house.
Sounds like something
Stephen King goes for walks.
So we're in good company?
Yeah.
All right.
So we're just like Stephen King.
I like to hear that.
You're exactly like Stephen King.
But other times, I'll just like finish the book, try to forget about all of the negative Nancy feelings, and sorry, mother-in-law, her name is Nancy. Yes. She's not negative. She's
not
great.
At all.
And then I have to like go write something.
Yeah.
And sometimes that helps too. That's sort of the other walk it off sort of thing I do is like, okay, just sit your butt in a chair and stare down the blinking cursor at the top of the page.
Or you can,
put a terrible sentence on the page and then put a slightly less terrible sentence on the page and then put a third halfway decent sentence on the page and then go back and delete the terrible one and you'll start to feel a little bit better about yourself.
A lot of times if I feel really awful about whatever I'm doing, I'll write it out. Like if you switch how you're doing it, go from typing to writing, something just a little sort of to trick yourself. But then also, like we talked before, one of the roles of a writer is to do research. So sometimes if you're just feeling like if I'm feeling like I'm not wordsmithing adequately, then I will do a different task that still needs to get done, but doesn't depend on prose.
Yep, I also like ways to trick myself, like forcing myself into getting first drafts, because I think I mentioned this before, I really dislike writing first drafts.
Right.
I kind of like all the editing process. That to me is a lot more fun, but the first draft is just painful. So what I started doing, the latest first draft that I wrote, I kind of made it a contest with myself, where it's like, okay, I have 1 hour, and in this 1 hour, I'm going to write as many words as possible. I'm going to try to write more words than I did yesterday, and pushing myself and just basically forcing myself to keep going, even if there's this little voice inside you, this sucks. This is the worst thing ever.
Well, NaNoWriMo.
These may be the worst words a human being has ever typed. It's like, nope, I'm just going. I only have 45 minutes left.
Right.
And that really helps me, actually.
Yeah, actually, I have a friend. I know her from another writing group, and she and one of her other friends. I don't write like this. She's asked me to do this with her, and I'm like, that ain't my jam. But so she and her friend Todd, they will do writing sprints is what they call them. And so they'll like text each other and they'll be like, okay, so in 5 minutes, and they'll set the timer, we're going to start writing and then we're going to write for an hour and have absolutely no distractions. So even though they're not in the same room or even, I don't even think the same state, they know that someone else is writing at the same time that they're writing and they're accountable to that. And, so I thought that was
They
interesting.
should see who writes the most words, and whoever does gets a prize.
I don't know if they do that. I know that's your kind of, there's got to be a prize, man. I'll have to ask her. Yeah.
So yeah, there is all of that we've been talking, and I think these are good tips for a lot of the stuff. But then there's more fundamentally, there's this sort of weird assumption I think we all have, where it's like, if I'm not the very best at this, then it's not worth doing, which is kind of silly. Like, that's the sort of thing I tell my 7-year-old not to think, because he'll get frustrated because he's just learning something and he's not good at it right away. So he's like, well, I quit. And then when a 7-year-old's doing it, it's like, well, no, buddy, you're first of all, you're still learning. And also in the back of my head, it's like, well, even if you don't turn out to be the best soccer player ever, it's still important to learn soccer and play it. You can have fun. So it's like, even if I never become as good an author as Cormac McCarthy, that doesn't mean my work isn't worth doing. That doesn't mean that I shouldn't keep going and try to do the projects I do have. Like, it's a very obvious thing to say, but it's kind of easy to catastrophize it away.
Right. Yeah, I don't know that I don't know if I go through specifically the thought process of if I'm not the best ever, but I think I am very afraid of valid negative critique. Like, that would be my worst nightmare, is if someone were to critique it and then once it's already out there. I will revise. I actually love revising, but it's when you have to let it go. And so if I ever actually get a book published and like somebody, tears it apart on Amazon or whatever, and then I agree with them, I don't know, that would be, I probably shouldn't think about these things.
I don't, well, I will say, one-star reviews are pretty inevitable.
It's true.
I will go ahead and say, when that happens, me and Gianna will read the one-star reviews for you. And we'll be like, they're totally off basis. Don't worry about them.
Or you could just write a couple one-star reviews and then
We could make it so obvious that they're like, they didn't actually pay attention to the book, that you're like, I can write off this one-star review and ignore it. We could do that for you. I'm willing.
But I think it's interesting, though, because really what's hiding under that thought process, like the little woe is me if I can't make this the absolute best thing ever, really what you're actually saying is you should be able to. So really you're kind of being a little arrogant. I am being a little arrogant. If that thought process is stopping you, like, well, it won't be good enough. Like, okay, Miss High Standards, like an ego thing.
Yeah. Like if it's not perfect, I don't want to be associated with it.
Right.
Yeah.
Woof.
Ow.
I don't like where this is going.
So something related to this, which I did want to address, so I think it's another important topic, is, there's this crisis point for a lot of us in our work where we reach a point where it's like you hit a wall, you lose confidence in it, and you have this decision like, okay, do I persevere? Do I keep going through this? Or should I abandon the project? And, we just talked, this whole conversation up to this point has been bad reasons to abandon a project, but there are good reasons to abandon projects too. So, Mandy, have you ever abandoned projects and thought later, yeah, that was the right decision?
Yes and no. Let's see. Obviously, I have 2 books that I stopped working on eventually. So that's hard to say if I abandoned them or I think I got a different idea and started something else.
Yeah, well, putting something to the side for a bit isn't the same as abandoning. Like,
right, well...
remember our Piranesi book club episode?
Yes.
Where Piranesi was an idea that Susanna Clark started and sort of put away for like 20 years and then came back to.
Right, and that's what so my first novel, which is just so bad, but I like the characters. And my girls, I used to read them little scenes from it when they were younger. And so they know the characters. It's Lucy and Tissy, they're sisters. It sounds like a children's book. Tissy's real name's Patricia. I named her after my great aunt. Anyway, but I like the characters. Maybe I don't like their names anymore now that I think about it. But I like them. But I just I essentially didn't really have anything bad happen to them in the book. Not bad enough, so it was really boring. But I like them. And so... I abandoned what that is. That book is called Cloud Hunting. And so I've abandoned what that book currently is because I just realized it's not good. But I guess that, like you said, it's a growth mindset.
Yeah, I mean, and if there are pieces of it, maybe you could use the characters for a different project.
Right, I probably will cannibalize it and, make something new.
Yeah, Gianna, you ever had this sort of impasse?
I've had projects that I've abandoned. I've had two or three novel ideas that I've completely ditched. Mostly I write creative nonfiction, memoir style, and essays. And I want to write a novel, I really do. But every time I try, it's much too forced, and I don't seem to be good at the plotting. And so there's several projects where I'm like, I can almost get there. I can almost pull this off. Like, I know I've written enough that I'm like, I could write a novel length project, but this isn't the one. And I always have to scrap it. So there's like 4 files on my computer of like half an outline and like 2 random chapters from somewhere within the story that have not been touched in years.
See, that's typically when I start journaling as the characters. And I learned with this so part of the problem with my first 2 is plotting is my least favorite thing to do. And I'm terrible at plotting.
You're such a literary author. You have your characters, you have your prose style, but you don't like the plots.
I don't know how to do them, and that is why I was going to say, because I'll sit there thinking, I think of it too much like a puppet master, even though I make the characters, I make them up. But the question that I started asking myself with this novel that really kept me going is when I would get them into a jam, I used to think, what should they do or what could happen? And I just started asking myself, okay, what would happen here? Something would happen. If this were really happening, if the situation you just put on that page were real, something is likely to happen. What would happen? And that sounds kind of silly, but somehow that helped my brain kind of break free. I guess because I was taking it out of my own control, even though I really wasn't. There's a lot of tricking myself in writing, apparently. Because I just realized that when I journal, like I said, I always think I'm doing research. But like I said, a lot of it ends up in the novel. So basically, I'm just tricking myself. Just keep tricking yourself into...
See, the point is to talk about projects that we've abandoned.
Oh, sorry. It's hard
we have to let those ones die. It's all right. There's seeds. Maybe they'll germinate into something new.
My problem is I actually start believing in my own characters, and I feel that I let them down.
I never believed in any of these characters.
Oh, well.
So I don't know what it says about me that I write memoirs successfully. Do I believe in that character too much? I'm concerned now.
Speaking of that.
Yes.
So my big experience with this was, if you've been around since the Paleolithic days of this podcast, you may remember.
Well referenced.
I had a different project at that point, which was sort of a memoir. It's one of those like memoir with a message things. It was like tale about me growing up in the evangelical world and wrestling with blah, 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 blah. Okay, so I started working on that project in earnest. What was it? Like...
How old were your kids? That's where I always go.
Oh, my kids weren't born yet.
Okay, well, then it was
so,
more than 7 years
like
ago.
8 or so years ago.
There you go.
And the weird thing was, I started putting it together. You put the book, you put the pitch, the query to the agents. Mm-hmm. I found an agent like right away. Like It was super easy. And everything seemed to be moving really fast. And all of a sudden I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I get my book to like the final stage at like a publishing house and we're almost there. And then it gets rejected. And yes, that was a punch in the gut. But then the funniest thing happens. I start to lose confidence in what I'm writing about. Oh. Readers, I will not bore you with all my reasons or whatever, but suffice it to say, I started losing all enthusiasm for my topic, and I started wondering if I should even be writing it. And I eventually reached the point where it's like, okay, it's almost a sunk cost thing, because it's like, I'm so friggin' close with this.
There you go.
I'm so close. And, it can't hurt to have a book published, right? Even if it's not what I actually want to write, having a book out there published with my name on it can't be bad. So I kept,
yes, it can.
So I kept working at it for a little while longer. And then I reached the point where I was like, yeah, I just can't do it. I think it was actually at an Anselm Arts Guild meeting where someone noted that when I talked about my fiction projects, I seemed excited. When I talked about my memoir project, I seemed to view my project with active hostility.
Active hostility. Wow,
and it was like, yeah, maybe having a book published with a message I'm not quite sure is helpful or useful at this point might not be the best thing, even if I'm pretty close to getting it published. Maybe it's better to just sort of roll the dice with something I actually want to do.
Yeah.
And that was a very long process. Mm-hmm. And it was very, very tough. I do not regret it at all. I'm confident, like several years on, that I made the right decision. But that was an instance where the project felt too big for me. And I came to the conclusion that it was too big for me because I wasn't supposed to do it.
Yeah.
And discerning the difference between the project feels too big for me, but I think it's important, so I should go on anyway, versus it's too big for me, maybe that's a signal I shouldn't do it. That is a difficult thing to determine a lot of times.
Yeah.
Agreed.
It takes discernment.
Yeah, so what do you all think the line should be then when you're determining, like, should I abandon a project? Because I do think also, just more fundamentally, there is something to be said for selectively pruning the things you're working on, right?
Yes.
So like you have an idea and it's a pretty good idea and you've put a lot of work into it. And I think that's something that we as, storytellers or just human beings can fall into a lot. I just talked about falling into the sunk cost fallacy. It's like, I put this much work into it, so let's just throw some more money down the pit. Maybe it'll happen. Where a lot of times it might be better if we actually deep down know it's not the best idea or it's not the best story, to just sort of put it to the side and move on to the next one. Mm-hmm. So what do we do with that, Gianna?
I don't. If you're asking where that line is, I don't know. I feel like it depends project to project and person to person. I'm in the middle of a project where I'm like, I actually don't know what to do with this next. Like, do I keep going? Do I put it on hiatus for now? Do I chuck it? I'm not going to chuck it, don't worry. But I don't know where that line is with this particular project. I've had some projects where it's super clear, like, I need to keep going with this. I was given the vision for this project, and I'm the one who has to carry it out. Whether or not it gets to what I think it should be, I'm the one who needs to do it. And then there's other projects like those novels sitting in a file on my computer where I'm like, I don't think they were meant to be. I think I just have big dreams of writing a great novel, and those are not it.
Yeah, I think, like you said, sometimes there are projects that you just know that it was given to you, and which sometimes can give you that small feeling again, because then, sort of like Moses, I think we were talking about that before in the green room, like Moses, like, why are you sending me? Send someone else. I can't do this. So I think we have to go to God with it and pray and ask him to remind us why why he gave us the idea, or the calling or whatever, which I think we all have to do just with the calling in general anyway. Like, why did you make me want to write when it can be such a painful journey?
Isn't it said that writers are people for whom writing is more difficult than everyone else?
That would be true.
That seems very true. But I think in large part with these projects that we're not sure what to do with, a lot of times, especially when you do need to move forward with them, they end up looking far different, both in end result and in process, than what we expect. And I could name my own example, but Matt, I'm going to point out you. It sounds like I didn't even know you actually had an agent or wrote nonfiction.
Yeah.
Because that has not been where your fiction journey has gone at all.
No, you only knew the later, happier Matt.
The guy whose eyes light up when he talks about dinosaurs, that one?
Yes.
That one.
But yeah, it is weird because for a long time, in college, I really started the thing that I seemed to like, it seemed to be my niche was creative nonfiction. Like that was the stuff in my writing class that I was getting the best feedback on. It seemed to be the stuff that came most naturally. So that was the stuff I tried writing, right out of college. Like my first attempts to like do something were all in that. And I kind of didn't really think of novel writing that way. And it's kind of through happenstance, right? It's like random conversation you have, random book you read, blah, 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 blah. And then, so that sort of took me to the memoir stuff. And while I'm working on that, literally I started working on my current novel project kind of as a side lark. I started working on in earnest in law school. When I was stressed out by other stuff, I just write notes concerning pteranodon battles and just do that to sort of calm myself down.
Oh, that's my go-to.
Yep.
Calmer is to write about pteranodon, whatever.
I have some really innovative tactical suggestions in case anyone's out there wondering.
Thank you.
Basically, that was sort of my side thing, and my real serious stuff was the memoir. But then eventually, I realized the side thing was stuff I actually super wanted to do, regardless of whether I was having early success with the memoir or not.
Yeah, that actually I totally forgot that I had an agent when the girls were really tiny. I totally forgot that. But it was when I thought I was going to write children's books because I thought they would be easier.
Oh, man.
If any of you have ever
that is the common fallacy, right?
That was me thinking I'm not, quote unquote, good enough to try to write a novel, but I really do want to write, so I'll try children's books. No.
Well, you got an agent,
hard.
so they must have been pretty good.
I just think she didn't know what she was doing, but thank you.
Oh, Mandy.
No, really. No, trust me. But yeah, so then I started writing articles. So I did creative nonfiction, and I got a few of those published. And then I wrote a short story for a contest and didn't really think it, what I was really trying to do was get into being a magazine article writer, a columnist or write articles for magazines.
Yeah.
And this magazine was having a contest, but the contest was fiction. And so I was like, golly, I haven't written fiction. I hadn't written fiction for years, but I was like, okay, I'll try a short story. And then I was a finalist. And then the finalists were supposed to submit a novel manuscript.
Oh,
that was that was the part of the prize of being a finalist in the short story contest, was to get to submit a novel manuscript. Well, I didn't have one. And so that is why my first novel is so bad, is because that is how I started writing it.
Wow.
It took a long time. I didn't know what I was doing at all. I just took the characters from the short story and tried to make more things happen. That's not how you do it.
Interesting.
Yeah, but
All right. Well, we are running low on time, but I did want to give you both sort of a final charge to like the storytellers, artists, just other folks out there facing down a project they feel like it's too big for them. If you had to give like closing bit of advice, what would it be?
Well, I think the thing that I think we all just learned in the process of talking about this is none of the work on any of the projects we've done was really wasted, because we learned in the process, and even if it's something we end up having to abandon ultimately, it leads us to the next project. So I think no work is wasted. So do it.
All right.
Oh, that's sort of Nike-ish. Sorry.
That's
just
right.
do it.
Align with Nike.
Oh,
Sometimes people got to sit down and just do it.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of a quote I saw on Instagram, and I tried to find who it is. I think it was another writer, but I can't remember. So if you're listening, I don't think you are. But if you're listening and this was you, let us know and we'll give you credit. They were saying that when you cannot do good work, just sit down and work well. And that was kind of a bit of a lightning bolt of an idea. Like, yeah, not all the work that we do will be good. Not all the sentences and stories we write will be good. But we can sit down and do our work well and be faithful to it, especially in those moments when God has kind of, sometimes it's God, sometimes it's just inspiration giving you a big project. But when you've been given this big idea and you think you need to go for it, then sit down and work well. Even if you're not doing good work, work well. And that will be fruitful in some way. Like you said, our work is not wasted. So.
Yeah.
All right, and that is a good note to end on. So Mandy, Gianna, thank you very much. And
Are you going to yodel us out?
I am not.
Okay.
fine. All right, well anyway, things are winding down at the Anselm Society Digital Pub. The fire is down to embers, the customers are trundling home, and you've polished off your final glass. Once again, Believe to See is a podcast of the Anselm Society Arts Guild. If you have about 18 or so seconds to spare right now, why not rate and review the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you again so much for listening, and we will catch you next time.